Hello and welcome again. In this lecture, we are going to discuss the audit planning. In audit, we usually follow the following steps. We start first by identifying the audit scope, what we are going to audit, what is the scope, what is the customer status, and what do we expect to have during this audit in terms of assets that we are going to review, systems that we are going to audit, and processes that we are going to cover. After that, we formulate or we create the audit objective, which is a document that states what is the purpose for this particular audit engagement or audit mission. After that, we identify the audit criteria and start in creating the audit procedures. Here, we are creating checklists, creating forms that we are going to fill during the audit engagement, and we are preparing what is the scenario that we are going to follow during the audit engagement. Don't imagine that the auditor is going to the audit mission without preparing him or herself for the audit engagement. Auditor should be competent, and auditor should have a clear methodology to follow while he or she is collecting evidences or discussing the audit points with the customer or with the auditee. After preparing and after doing all of that, we go to the actual audit engagement. We start in review, collect. We start first, of course, with collecting, reviewing, and evaluating the evidences. And after that, and based on the evidences that we are going to collect, we form the audit conclusion and opinion, which will include the auditor opinion about the status of the controls that the auditee is controlling and holding. After forming the opinion, we report the audit result to the management, of course, after discussing the key points with the process owner. When should we perform the audit? Usually, audit is running on known intervals, like we are performing audit every year, every 6 months, whatever. But in some situations, we might need to create or perform an audit engagement outside the normal recurring times or outside the normal times. Like when we have a new control or we have a problem in one of the controls, in that case, management might request for conducting a forensic audit or conduct an audit that can identify what is the problem or why the control is not working properly. In other cases, we might have a major change in risk environment, like our last audit was based on an on-premise data center. In organizations, especially in the information system, and specifically when we talk about the technology or information technology environment, we might have our services hosted inside our own data center in our own building as a company. In this situation, we have a risk profile that might include, for example, physical security, might include data security, and all of that sort of stuff. But we have a total control over our physical security. But consider that we decided to migrate to the cloud. I'm talking here from the customer point of view. Customer has decided to migrate the workload, the services, the servers to the cloud environment, such as Alibaba, OCI, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, Amazon, and all of that. In that case, customer will not retain any responsibility and will not retain any control on the physical security. So here we are talking about major change in the risk environment. Or maybe we weren't working or operating in a climate or in a location that has a huge level of risk, but recently, due to the changes in the economical situation, we might be subject to a new kind of threats or a new kind of risks. So in that case, management might request the auditor to perform an audit because we have a major change in the risk environment. Also, we might perform the audit earlier using like an evaluation form or using a methodology, but by time we discovered that this methodology was not correct, was not accurate, and there is another way to provide better results. So here we have like an enhanced evaluation technique. So we might conduct an audit engagement to use this new enhancement evaluation technique or this new enhanced evaluation technique. If we have a significant problem, if we have a fraud, in that case, we might need to conduct an audit outside the normal times or normal process, because in that case we need to conduct an investigation, and we have a type of audit known as the forensic audit that is used for the investigation. So in audit dates we usually run the audit on known intervals, but at some situations we might have some audit engagement outside of the normal times. When it comes to audit planning, what should we define during the audit planning stage? We need to identify the audit subject, which means identifying the area that we are going to audit. This can be done by conducting risk assessment, understand the customer or the auditee business, understand the critical areas, and based on that, select this area and give a priority for this area to be covered during the audit mission. Remember one thing, in audit, we are working with a project management methodology. We have limited time, limited resources, as well as limited budget. And we cannot cover 100% from customer infrastructure or customer processes unless we have enough budget and enough time. That's why it's very important to define what is most critical as a customer side, and we will give a priority for the critical processes and critical assets, so it should be covered during the audit engagement. If we have an additional time, of course, we can cover all of the assets and all of the processes. But what if we do not have enough time and enough budget and enough resources? In that case, audit subject can be used to identify, or to be precise, risk assessment can be utilized to properly identify the audit subject. In audit planning, we also identify the audit objective. And in the audit objective, we identify the purpose of the audit. For example, audit might relate it to contractual or regulatory requirements. So what is the objective of our audit? Ensure the compliance with ISO 27001, ensure the compliance with PCI DSS, ensure the compliance with the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. This is what do we mean by the audit objective. Audit objective is different than the audit subject. Audit subject is about what are the processes, assets that we are going to audit, while audit objective refer to the purpose of the audit. Why we are going to audit these processes and these assets? Because we have like a contractual obligation, we have a regulatory requirements, and in that case, we need to conduct the audit. We also identify the audit scope, which come later on after identifying the subject and objective. In audit scope, we are identifying the actual systems. So, audit subject might refer to the operational area, might refer to financial area, might refer to information system or IT system or network security part. Still, all of these definitions in the audit subject are still granular. It includes multiple technologies, multiple solutions, multiple specific systems under this area. In the audit scope, we identify the specific systems or units in the organization that we are going to include in our review. In the audit scoping, this will help us in properly manage our resources and identify the needed resources for successful audit engagement. After clearly defining the subject, objective, and the scope, we go to the actual pre-audit planning. And in the pre-audit planning, we identify what is the required technical skills and resources, like we need people who are familiar with network security, subject matter expert in particular type of system, because these people will be utilized during the audit engagement. They will utilize their knowledge, their skills in order to test and perform evaluation for these systems. Identify the sources of information for the review, such as the flowchart, policies, standard procedures. It is very important for the auditor, by the way, when he or she go and conduct audit mission, to first understand the type of business, the type of organization, the locations that going to be covered during the audit engagement, the communication plan, the escalation criteria, and the management structure. Understand who will be the contact from customer side. At the end, we are working as a project. We need also to read the organizational policies, standard procedures, because at the end, one of the objectives of the audit is to ensure that the audit is aligned with governance requirements. and governance requirements are clearly defined in policies, standards, and also in the procedures. After that, we develop audit procedures, which includes a checklist, tools, methodologies, different kind of checklist forms that we are going to fill during the audit. So we can prepare like a checklist that cover what is the questions that we are going to ask to the HR during assessing and evaluating the HR process. The questions that we are going to ask to the system engineer to understand how system engineer function or how system administration activity is conducted. The questions that we are going to ask to the identity access management officer, the one who is responsible for managing the user accounts, perform password reset or account activation, and all of this sort of stuff. So we will not go and start thinking about what we are going to ask to the auditee at the audit time. We should prepare all of this information and all of this kind of checklist and procedures before going to the actual audit engagement. And later on, all of that will be included in the audit plan. And the audit plan will include the communication plan, will include the audit methodology, the tools and the different checklists and scripts, and the scope regarding systems, specific system, the methodology of performing the sampling. All of that will be defined in the audit plan. Just to provide you with a conclusion about what we have discussed so far, the audit process or the internal audit function, whether internal by the way or external, would probably start by audit charter. Audit charter will create the audit department. The audit department later on might ask the auditor to perform an audit or might issue engagement letter to invite an external auditor to come and perform audit mission on my organization. In both cases, the internal audit auditor or external audit auditor will need to perform a risk assessment to identify the critical areas and identify the critical assets. And the auditor also will need to determine if the audit is possible or not. In some situation, we might be asked to perform an audit, but when we come to the real situation, we find that there is no clear roles and responsibility and accountability. So even if we identified some gaps, we will not find anyone who can take the ownership and fix these issues. We might have lack of transparency. We might have other sort of issues which can make the audit engagement useless. We might have issues related to evidence collection. So as long as we cannot collect enough evidences, we cannot form a conclusion. In that case, audit will not be possible. So after determining whether the audit is possible or not, and hopefully the audit will be possible, we will start in planning and developing the checklist, the test, the methodology and process that we are going to follow during the audit. Then we perform the actual audit, and then we gather the required evidences, and after that we analyze these results to report the finding and form a conclusion. During the audit planning, we need to identify the subject and we need to identify clearly the audit scope. And as the audit project consists of auditors and limited time and limited budget, in that case, we need to set a priority for which aspects that we need to cover during the audit engagement. That's why risk-based auditing came to the scene. Risk-based auditing means that we will perform a risk assessment to identify the critical areas or critical processes that is most critical from the business point of view. And based on that, we will define the overall risk of each process, and we will do a kind of organization for these processes based on the level of the criticality, and we will build our audit plan to include all processes that rated with high risk. During the audit engagement, these processes will be tested first, and based on that, we can either conclude our audit or we can continue if we still have enough time to cover other processes as well. In other words, risk-based auditing help me to select the processes and assets that is most critical from the audit universe and only cover the high areas of risk. All processes and all assets that might be held by the auditee is known as the audit universe. Audit universe is the total assets and processes that we can select from it to cover during our audit. In audit planning, we have two types of planning. we have short-term planning, which include audit missions that need to be covered during a fixed time period or very limited time period, such as a year. And we have the long-term planning, which can consider the future arrangements or consider the strategic direction and the strategic changes in the organization, and we can, based on that, plan for a long-term planning. For example, during the year, I might focus on integrated audit on the financial department, operation department, and IT department, and this audit will be planned during 1 year. And during this audit, I'm aware that I'm going to cover this process and this process and this process. But as I understand that in the future we might have changes related to the use of technology or using a new standard or a new requirements, in that case, I might plan for a long-term duration to ensure that by the end of 5 years, for instance, I'm going to cover all processes under IT department and I will have the required skills and capabilities in order to be able to audit these areas. Like for instance, if I'm using or if I'm planning to use as an organization the artificial intelligence in my processes and in my operations. Right now, I might not use this feature right now. But by time, the adoption and the utilization for this tool might emerge and might increase. In that case, the auditors need to possess the skills and capabilities to perform an audit that cover this particular new technology or new feature. In that case, during the long-term planning, I can identify such requirements and plan for a training, plan for development for the audit team in order to be ready on the long-term period to perform an audit on one of these features or on this technology. At the end, whether short-term plans or long-term plans should be reviewed and approved by senior management to ensure that it really meet the requirements. As a conclusion for audit planning, planning steps include: first, understand the business mission, objective, and processes. Understand the business environment, risk profile, challenges and changes. Review the previous work paper, for example, previous audit reports. Review policies, standards, understand the laws and regulations, understand the organizational structure, and understand the escalation matrix, and the communication plan will be prepared based on this understanding. Perform a risk assessment to identify high areas of risk, set the scope and objective, develop the audit strategy, build the audit team, and handle the logistics, accommodation subject, transportations, and all of that stuff. Because audit might be conducted in another city, another country, so in the planning, do not forget to make sure such logistics and accommodation and the transportation requirements are really addressed. Couple of definitions that I would like to highlight in this slide is: what do we mean by audit strategy? Audit strategy is a general term about how the audit is going to be conducted. It sets the scope, timing, direction of the audit. The audit strategy, in another word, is a guidance for developing the audit plan. Another important aspect that you need to be aware of is that auditor can review the previous audit reports, previous risk assessment results, as long as it was conducted by an independent auditor. If I'm going to review the customer control, I might rely on some previous work papers exist at customer environment, such as previous audit reports, previous findings detected by another auditor, and the previous risk assessment result. As long as all of these documents was created by independent auditor that is not part of the organization, I will guarantee that all of these documents are neutral and not biased. That's why I can rely on such documents to assist in the audit, to assist in preparing the scope, and to assist in making a decision regarding my audit engagement. I hope that was clear for you, and see you in the next lecture.